Okay, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Grants Management Breakfast Forum, where we'll be sharing the results of this year's annual Grants Management Survey. I'm going to go ahead and let Kathy Newcomer from George Washington University kick us off. Kathy?
Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm Kathy Newcomer. I'm the director of the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at George Washington University, where we train people to work in all three sectors, but working in the public interest. Master's degree programs where they do learn about grants and grants management as an extremely important part of the way governments at all levels work in our country. And I'm delighted to have been involved with Heather and Jeff since the beginning. For 10 years, we felt that it was extremely important to hear from people across the country that are involved in grants management about what's going on, what's going well, and what's not going well. So I am just delighted to be here to pass the baton to another partner in this, and that's NGMA. So Scott Scheffler of NGMA is going to welcome you as well. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you to REI for having me and having NGMA as part of this process. Scott Scheffler, I'm on the board of the National Grants Management Association, and I'm the immediate past president. So the president currently is LaShawn Brown. You will likely see her next year as part of this process. The National Grants Management Association is an association that represents the interests of grant managers, whether they're federal, state, local, tribal government grants managers, private sector grants managers. We have we've had significant growth in the last 5 to 10 years in terms of the size of our association. And we annually have a conference where we welcome everyone to DC to network and learn. In addition to this past year, we received accreditation for our certified grant management specialist credential, which is something we'll be talking about a little bit as we address some of the questions in the survey. So that's a lot about NGMA, but I say all of that to say, we love the fact that this survey has workforce components, and it's been a pleasure to partner with REI. So welcome to everyone. Heather, I'll turn over to you.
Great, thanks. My name is Heather Morgan. I lead our grants offering at REI Systems. For more than 3 decades, REI has partnered with federal, state, local, and nonprofit organizations to design and implement grants management solutions that help agencies modernize their grant systems, improve data visibility, and strengthen oversight and performance across the grants lifecycle. As Kathy mentioned, we have been doing this survey in partnership with NGMA and George Washington University since 2016. So happy to see us hit our 10th year of gathering insights from the grants community. So the purpose of the survey is to keep a pulse on the field, understanding the challenges, priorities, and emerging trends shaping grants management today. Each year, we share the survey findings at these grants management breakfast forums, bringing together a panel of leaders from across the grants community to reflect on the results, discuss what they're seeing in their own organizations, and share best practices for improving grants management. Today's discussion will build on survey insights and explore how organizations are navigating the evolving grants landscape. So keeping that context in mind, let's go ahead and take a look at today's agenda. So first, I'll briefly introduce the survey and explain how it was conducted, and then I'll walk through the key takeaways from this year's results, highlighting some of the major themes we're seeing across the grants community. And then after that, we'll transition into the panel discussion to get those real-life insights into what organizations are facing today. The majority of the time will be spent with the panel itself. During the panel, we welcome the audience to put questions in the chat, and then Jeff, our panel facilitator, will accommodate as many as feasible, keeping in mind the time constraints and that we do have several topic areas that we want to make sure get covered. Today's presentation, including the full recording, will be shared with the attendees, and it'll also be available via our website for download. I saw we already had some questions on that in the chat. So as mentioned, the purpose of the survey is to provide the grants community with insights into emerging trends and operational practices, as well as look at the challenges and opportunities across the grants lifecycle. So each year, the survey gathers both quantitative and qualitative input from practitioners and leaders involved in grants administration. And while the survey does evolve over time to reflect changes in policy, technology, and practice, We do also strive to maintain some continuity in many of the questions so that we can track trends and changes year over year. Ultimately, the goal is to strengthen collective understanding of what's working well and where improvements are needed. Each year, the survey is distributed to thousands of grant professionals and stakeholders across federal, state, local, tribal, nonprofit, and private sector organizations. And I did just want to say a huge thanks to those attending today who participated this year. Strong participation helps produce more representative insights and minimizes potential bias. This year, we had a record-breaking 773 responses, so that's up about 19% from last year. One notable takeaway is the strong representation from the non-government community, reflecting the important role that nonprofits, foundations, and other partners play in delivering grant-funded programs. Another interesting point is that many of the respondents actually operate as both grant makers and grant recipients, which highlights the interconnected nature of today's grants ecosystem. Here you'll note another encouraging aspect of the survey is the depth of experience among respondents. More than half of participants report having over 10 years of experience in grants management, indicating that the survey reflects perspectives from seasoned grants professionals who work closely with their grant programs every day. And now I'm going to talk to the key takeaways from this year's survey. The first one is on funding uncertainty. When respondents were asked to rank the most significant challenges facing grants management, funding uncertainty and susceptibility to politics was by far the most dominant challenge faced this past year, with over 70% of respondents citing this as one of their top challenges. This challenge far exceeded the others, things like fraud risk, workforce shortages, or technology limitations. And so the message from this is while organizations are working hard to strengthen their processes and their systems, the greatest instability in the grants ecosystem right now is driven by funding volatility and the shifting administration priorities. Second is on outcome measurement, remaining a significant gap. Despite longstanding federal policy emphasis on performance management, nearly half of respondents reported that they either can't measure outcomes or don't know whether outcomes have improved. Only a relatively small share of respondents reported significant improvements in outcomes. So this suggests that consistent measurement of program impact remains a challenge across the grants community. We've seen this over the past number of years. The next one is on federal policy frameworks, which are broadly accepted, but implementation remains a challenge. So across the frameworks, including 2 CFR 200, the Data Act, the GREAT Act, and others, responses were largely positive or neutral regarding these, but the survey data suggests that the real challenge lies in the implementation capacity. So having the staffing, the systems, the training, the data infrastructure necessary to effectively execute and comply with those frameworks. Fourth is around workforce development and retention. Another clear theme from the survey is the importance of the grants workforce itself. Many respondents highlighted staffing constraints, the need for stronger training and onboarding, and concerns about retaining experienced professionals. This is something that we see every year in the survey. It just reinforces that investing in workforce development and retaining institutional knowledge is essential for effective grants management. Fifth, technology modernization is important, but it's not a silver bullet. While many respondents identified the need to modernize grant systems and expand automation, including looking at how to leverage AI, technology challenges this year took a backseat to some of the other issues like funding instability and workforce capacity. So this suggests that while technology modernization is important, systems alone aren't going to solve all the challenges that are facing grants management today. Organizations really need to find that right balance of people, processes, and technology. And then lastly, the future of grants management will likely be more digital, data-driven, and adaptive. Looking ahead, respondents expect continued movement towards modernized systems, stronger data capabilities, and greater use of automation. Many also pointed to the growing role of emerging technologies, including artificial intelligence, to help reduce administrative burden, introduce efficiencies, improve data analysis, and support better decision-making. And at the same time, organizations will need to remain adaptive. responding to changing funding environments, evolving policies, and increasing expectations for transparency and performance. So taken together, the survey results suggest that while the grants community is experienced and resilient, it's facing a set of interconnected challenges that'll be shaping the future of grants management. When respondents were asked about their top priorities over the next 3 years, many focused first on workforce capacity, highlighting staffing shortages and increasing workload pressures. Training and workforce development also surfaced frequently, with respondents noting the need for clearer procedures, stronger onboarding, and continuous professional development. Another major theme was process standardization, including formal policies, clearer internal workflows, and more consistent monitoring practices. Technology modernization was also a priority, particularly upgrading outdated grant systems and increasing automation to reduce manual tasks. And then finally, respondents emphasized strengthening compliance and monitoring, especially improving financial oversight and performance tracking. So overall, these responses suggest organizations are looking for balanced improvements across the board. So as we look ahead, respondents identified forces likely to shape the future of grants management. The most common responses included the federal funding uncertainty, so reflecting those concerns about shifting priorities, budget changes, and the long-term sustainability of their grant programs. Many respondents also pointed to technology and automation, noting the growing role of digital tools, including emerging technology like AI, with the potential to reduce administrative burden. Another theme was the increasing demand for data and reporting, with respondents expecting more emphasis on performance measurement and evidence-based decision-making. Regulatory changes also remain a constant factor, requiring organizations to continuously adapt to evolving compliance standards. So taken together, this suggests that the future of grants management will likely be more digital, more data-driven, and more adaptive to policy and funding shifts. So with that context in mind, we're excited to hear from our panelists about how they're seeing these issues and priorities play out in their own organizations and across the broader grants community. So here with me today is my colleague, Jeff Myers. He's a senior director at REI, who will be facilitating today's panel. Jeff has been involved with the survey since its inception and brings a wealth of grants knowledge and expertise. And I'll ask all of our panelists to turn their videos on if they haven't already. And we can go ahead and introduce our panel. We have an outstanding panel this year that brings together perspectives from across the grants management community. I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves, including their name, organization, and role. And we'll kick things off with Ms. Pearson. Margaret, are you there?
Sorry. Good morning, everyone. I'm Margaret Pearson. I'm Deputy Controller in OMB's Office of Federal Financial Management, and I'm joined by Steve Mackey, who's on our grants team.
All right. Oh, sorry, Steve.
No, go ahead. I was just, Margaret introduced me. That's fine. Thank you.
All right. Good morning. My name is Chad Clifford. I'm with the Department of Health and Human Services. I'm an executive director in their Office of Grants for policy training, as well as director for the Grants QSMO and our data standards work.
Hi, good morning. I'm Andrea Brandon. I'm with the Department of the Interior. I am the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Budget, Finance, Grants, and Acquisitions. Other functions fall under me as well: property, small business, the BIO, the Business Integration Office functions, all of our systems that implement our grants management, acquisitions, property, etc. Our AI, our RPA. Excited to be with you here this morning.
Briefly, Scott Sheffer, you already heard from me with National Grants Management Association.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Chelsea Cole. I'm with the U.S. Department of Agriculture, where I serve as the Federal Financial Assistance Department Policy Lead here in the Office of the Chief Financial Officer. It's a joy to serve in this role for our 21 awarding agencies and offices for our 448 financial assistance programs.
From Kansas. I'm Natalie Clark, Assistant Director, Career Standards and Assessment Services, overseeing career and technical education at the secondary level. That includes Perkins and work-based learning.
Great, and I'm Jeff Myers, Senior Director with REI Systems. I want to encourage members of our audience to type in questions as they arise in your mind in the Q&A panel. We may not have time for all of them, and we'll generally read them out to the panelists as we go along. But with that, let's kind of kick off what seem likely to be some of the questions that are maybe most prominent in mind of a lot of our participants. And so the first, of course, is the kind of, well, things seem to be moving at a rapid pace and perhaps changing rapidly and significantly with this administration. How do you deal with such uncertain funding? And I think probably the right person to start it off is Andrea, because she's had a lot of experience kind of across budget as well as planning, as well as grants management for a variety of agencies. Andrea, would you like to address that?
I sure would. So I'll first start off by saying, with regard to the federal side of things. So basically, here at DOI, we had already received funding for fiscal year 2026. And with that funding, we had certain priorities that our leadership within the department, our secretary, our deputy secretary, program offices, et cetera, wanted funded. And so with that being said, as we look forward to fiscal year 2027 and the negotiation of the different programmatic budgets and so forth, we look at the 2026 priorities and we put forth to the Office of Management Budget the same priorities for those programs, and moving forward to that, as many of you might know, the federal budget cycle looks at things 3 years, the current year, the upcoming year, and then 2028, fiscal year 2028. So we kind of have our priorities already established for us by our leadership. And we're looking for 2028 at this point based on the information that we put forward to the Office of Management and Budget and what the president wants to see. So that's how the internal budget is functioning with regard to our programmatic requirements and priorities that we'd like to see moving forward. I would say for recipients, it's always a good strategy for the recipients to look at any time for their own sustainability, their future sustainability. So looking not just to the federal government for sources of income, but also other the states and local governments, if you're not a state and local government, if you are a university or a nonprofit organization, looking for funding possibly from the states, looking for funding through other private entities, through foundation funding, et cetera, and also through use of your program income, generation of program income. So it's always a good idea if you are a grant recipient to always look for sustainability options, because you never know whether you're going to have funding for your future year amounts that are put on your notice of award. And so with that, I can pass it. I think Chad has backup from that question.
Ben, do you want to add anything?
Sure. I think one, more than any administration I've seen, there's a real focus on their policy priorities. And from both a recipient perspective and from the federal agency side, that is where we're focused, right? In terms of how our programs are being driven and helping ensure, to the extent feasible and practicable within discretionary programs, that our programs are helping drive and align with those priorities when you're thinking from a multi-year perspective. I also think focusing on results and impact, there's a real and important value with this administration to really focus on how awards and how we as civil servants, right, as public servants in the federal side, what are we doing on a day-to-day basis to help ensure we're improving our programs and that they actually deliver measurable results and improvements for the lives of American citizens. And for HHS, there's been significant uncertainty last year as well, but really we're still focused on some significant long-term improvements to our HHS policy environment and our large HHS IT systems and shared services we run. We're still driving a multi-year effort to create, co-leading with OMB and Margaret's team, government-wide data standards, the first for all of grants, which is a huge and important work, and we've had significant success. We're doing enormous modernizations of grants.gov, the simpler grants.gov. I'd encourage people to go find that site where they can find the modernized find function that's there now. And there are some large investments happening at HHS for grant solutions, which is the biggest shared service in government for core award management. to help modernize that service that is used by a large number of federal agencies and recipients.
Chad, I just noticed in the chat, there's a question from Rebecca Rodriguez, a member of the audience, that seems topical. She says she's new to grant making, sees a wide range of platforms used across a variety of government agencies, wonders, do there need to be that many? And I'm curious about, as you mentioned simpler grants, how broad do you think, and maybe Margaret, you want to jump in as well, how broad do you think it will be that the adoption of simpler grants across the range of federal agencies?
Simpler grants, grants.gov, simpler grants is grants.gov. They are the same. Simpler grants is the name we give grants.gov, which is the one place that all the public can go and find funding opportunities for government. So if you're looking to the question, if you're looking for opportunities, go to grants.gov, go to simplergrants.gov and try the new find function. It's highly improved in terms of prior to the legacy site. And the team is working on a simplified and improved apply function as well. That'll improve that. But your question about the IT environment, Jeff, it's great. Yes, the IT environment is not small. It is large. When we first started with the Grants Quality Service Management Office that works with OMB, there were over 200 core management systems across 50 agencies. That's a lot. It's hard for recipients to navigate. We thought that, we confirmed that. That's the feedback we get every time we talk to recipients is the systems environment is clunky, it's large and unwieldy if you get more than one grant. The consolidation of that environment and easing the use and having a smaller systems environment to modernize the tools so that recipients have smaller number of tools and more modern tools is so important to helping drive success.
So I'm taking kind of two things from you and Andrea's comments. One is we're working on the kind of the system consolidation and making it simpler for recipients and applicants. I'm also taking from Andrea kind of, well, people may feel like the sky is falling, but agencies are still proposing their priorities in an intentional way that both complies with the kind of their legislative mandate as well as kind of their desired program outcomes. And I think that's a nice segue. I wonder whether or not, Margaret, you would be able to say, clearly performance outcomes are very important to this administration. And occasionally that's a little more challenging to measure when you're spending money through grants and through grantees as a federal agency than when you're spending the money directly through your own staff or what have you. I wonder if you can talk a little bit, Ms. Pearson, about what it is you think are the kind of the paths forward for seeing what grant outcomes are in a kind of a hopefully a well-measured way.
Thank you for that question. So from an OMB perspective, we want programs to be purposeful, necessary, and able to demonstrate results, notwithstanding the duration of funding. It's vital that grantees and subrecipients as well establish performance measures at the outset, at the start. Programs should take a look at indicators of progress along the way, as well as outcome measures that can be used to demonstrate progress and the way that funding has been spent to the American people. Program implementers should really be motivated to demonstrate results, to prove positive outcomes, and should be really well-equipped and confident in your ability to make the case for the American public that their program is worth preserving. And all of that is achieved by having a clear sense of the outcomes you seek from the start, as well as being mindful that certain outcomes won't be reached immediately. It will take time. So what are the intermediate indicators that you can track and use to be able to make the case along the way?
Great. And I know that a lot of our audience members are at a state and local level in grant recipient agencies, and they're kind of concerned about people, the kind of the boots on the ground that are helping make the grant program's mission outcomes be achievable. I wonder whether or not, Chad, can you talk a little bit about potential workforce implications and essentially kind of the question as to, well, if we're uncertain about our funding, how can we retain people to some extent that are, we can't promise them absolutely that we'll be able to pay them in the coming years or months or years?
Sure, Jeff. Over 20 plus years in the federal government working in grants, staff retention has always been a problem and a challenge, maybe more so recently. But particularly for recipients, we've heard, and we did work with tribes and jointly with OMB and Treasury and Interior, to really understand tribal challenges as an example and as a case study, particularly of small recipients with smaller capabilities, smaller budgets. Staff turnover is one of their biggest challenges, right? So understanding and thinking about how we can help them. How can we ease the system environment? How can we improve the policy environment? How can we improve the reporting requirements on recipients so like Margaret said, that it drives towards meaningful results, right? Like, are we measuring the right things? That's so important, right? So in terms of, how we understand that and acknowledge that and how we account for that and how we work with recipients. On the whole, though, on the federal side, I don't think grants are going anywhere. We are still the largest expenditure, one of the largest expenditures in government. It's still more year over year than procurement. When I learned that 5 years ago, that shocked me, just how big grants is. And when I read the congressional budgets, the budget levels are very similar to the last year. So grants are not going away. So while, like I think Margaret said, the focus on results and the focus on really the core question of grants is the government are the American people getting the value out of what we in the grant programs do is the best question, right? That our grants, is there is this changing significantly? No, grants are here to stay, Jeff.
So that's kind of a great message. The grant management skill set is going to be in demand. It may be that we change what we spend the money on, change what some of our goals are for the outcomes, but the skills are still needed. Natalie, you've got kind of a great state level, both a kind of a grant recipient, grant applicant, as well as a pass-through grantor role in Kansas. Can you tell us a little bit about how do you deal with uncertainty around funding, or how does your agency do?
Sure. So I can speak specifically on Perkins. Perkins, we've been very fortunate that the funding has been supported, and we have had stable funding, and we expect to for next year. Thinking about the landscape, we were one of the 8 early adopter states looking at the National Modernized Framework. So we aligned our labor market in Kansas with the new national model. So made sure that our clusters and pathways were aligned with those high skill, high demand, high wage jobs. Make sure it was an investment in Kansas. Thinking about at the state level, we're very fortunate in Kansas that we have weighted funding for those state-approved pathways that align with the labor market. So I think that looking at both federal and state and the modernization, there's a lot going on in career and tech ed and Perkins, but we have been fortunate to have the funding remain consistent.
So in the area where you're focused, you've had good luck in terms of kind of being consistent with policy priorities at the federal level. I'm curious, are there other aspects of your Department of Education in Kansas that maybe have not had such good luck, other programs that have seen funding cuts? And can you tell anything about kind of how they address that funding uncertainty?
Sure. So I can speak primarily for Perkins, but of course we do have special education and title services within our agencies. And so of course everyone is looking at their budgets, but primarily with Perkins, we have been very fortunate and have remained consistent.
Okay. All right. I would like to stay with you for a moment and talk about kind of measuring impact, because you're kind of where the rubber meets the road and kind of the benefit of the federal grant funding really takes place. So for example, with education of children in Kansas, I wonder if you can tell me, there's a great desire, as we've heard from Margaret and Scott and Chad and others, about trying to get good information about outcomes. Can you tell me, are there any things that are really kind of making it difficult to get that outcome data and information in your context, and any things you would suggest doing about that?
So with Perkins 5, we have our state determined performance levels, and we have our actual performance levels. And we've been fortunate. There's a national research study that just came out. I encourage you to look at it. What we know about the impact of career and technical education, been positive, showing that it's statistically significant, impacting students in academic achievement, high school completion, and college readiness. So our grant recipients report these indicators, and we see the same trends in Kansas since we've moved into Perkins 5. And we provide that to our grant recipients each year as part of their application. They look at the comprehensive local needs assessment, which is a regional needs assessment, looking at their gaps and looking at their performance. So I'd say we are fortunate that they report their performance levels, And each year we look at those to determine what their strategies will be going forward to make sure that students in Kansas are provided with accurate information on those occupations that are high skill, high demand, and high wage.
So what you're telling me, and there are a couple of interesting pieces of that I want to draw out. You're saying that, hey, you know what? We don't define all the performance measures ourselves, nor actually do our grantees. We've used some over a period of time that have kind of helped us set a benchmark and understand how things are evolving. And we're actually relying upon academia to help figure out, in this case, for career and vocational education, what should be the outcome. I'm curious as to kind of, the contrast presumably with some other programs is we like folks to propose a program they think will be really innovative. And when we do that, we want them to propose how to measure it. How do you balance, or how do you see the Department of Education in Kansas balancing that desire for innovation and for measuring? Was the innovation successful in this one geography and it was a different innovation was unsuccessful elsewhere, with this kind of desire for being able to track a trend and have the kind of the academically identified performance outcomes? How do you balance the need for a kind of a different performance measure from every grant recipient?
So we have a state quality performance level. We have indicator of quality pathways. We can choose post-secondary credits earned during high school, work-based learning, or industry recognized credentials. Our districts collect all three, but the state reported is post-secondary credits earned during high school. The Kauffman Foundation works a lot with our Kansas City area schools, and they think about market value assets. Those do align with those quality pathway indicators that we can choose from. So the districts have local choice too on how they want to implement. We have new graduation requirements. They also align with those quality pathway indicators. We encourage that students earn two assets, post-secondary assets for graduation, but we encourage them to certainly have more than that because, of course, the research shows that if they have those, the more they have, and if they're a concentrator and have that concentrator status, that they'll be more likely to succeed in post-secondary.
So you're saying it's not all up to you to say what are the performance goals and outcomes you're going to use to measure the recipients, and you're going to define some, but you're going to expect them to define and propose some and provide that data also. So kind of some of each.
Yes, we have certain performance indicators that are required for each state, but the pathway high quality indicators, each state can choose one, but our recipients collect all three because if their student wants to continue on to be a concentrator or a completer, which is a state definition in Kansas, we ask them to choose one or more of those. And it is a graduation requirement. So we encourage them to have at least one, more, or many, because we know with achieving each of those, their probability of success will be even greater.
Great. So one of the things you're talking about all sounds great to me, but it also sounds like, boy, a lot of data. Someone's got to put some energy into kind of gathering that in addition to the energy for having to find it. And I want to ask, Andrea, you've been kind of at the forefront of a number of technology sorts of things. And I wonder whether for either your perspective as a grantor agency or you're, speaking on behalf perhaps of some grantees, if you choose to, has technology in particular, has artificial intelligence helped with that data gathering, made it less burdensome, more accurate, more timely? And what has been your experience about how you found the best uses for your purposes?
Okay, so that's a great question. First of all, we heavily lean a few years ago on robotics process automation. So any type of business process, whether it's in the financial assistance grant arena or the contracting arena, we found a way to put a bot on it. And many of you may have already heard we name our bots here in Interior. We have a very famous bot named Bob, the closer, and he does our acquisition closeout. So he makes sure we're in compliance with closing out contracts. We are also reusing Bob on the grant side to do our grants closeouts. So we're making sure that we can use our technology for compliance purposes to 2 CFR 200. In addition to that, we have a number of artificial intelligence projects that are ongoing here for compliance, again, to 2 CFR 200. We have an artificial intelligence that does audit requirements. We have an annual audit review of all of our grants management business practices within the bureaus. And so that's on the programmatic side. And then recently we underwent a grants consolidation effort where we took all the grants management specialists out of the bureaus and pulled them up to headquarters. So historically, we use an artificial intelligence to go into each bureau and to help us with our audit of the business processes. But we are currently now using the artificial intelligence to gather information about the skills and competencies of all those grants management specialists that we have pulled into headquarters. We're looking at do they have the actual competencies, knowledge, and skill sets in the entire life cycle of the grants process, so whether that's pre-award, award, post-award monitoring, et cetera, and close out, even audits, a single audit act resolution. We're gathering that information. We are also using the artificial intelligence to help us with reverse site visit information. We're on each of the projects, which we have a lot of grant projects. So trying to do appropriate monitoring. There's not a lot of funding to go do on-site site visits. So we're looking at the reverse site visit model, and we're using artificial intelligence for that. We're also using artificial intelligence to do reviews of our internal control practices on grants business processes and the life cycle of grants management and so forth. And so we have quite a number of artificial intelligence projects and pilots that are ongoing within the Department of the Interior. I would say one of our greatest things that we're doing right now is, because they're of the advent of agentic AI, is we're looking now to see what types of actual business processes in the grants management life cycle can we actually turn over to an artificial intelligence, an agentic one, so that it can handle that particular portion of grants management. And we're looking at that because we do have, we've had a reduction in the number of grants management specialists, but we still need to ensure that the process is upheld, that the grants are awarded, that we have appropriate oversight over them, that in addition, I think I didn't mention that we also have an AI that looks at the budget narratives, the budget that comes in on the grants, and the budget narratives. So we're using artificial intelligence a lot, financial capability reviews, et cetera. I would say that is the direction that we're moving into, so that we can get a handle on the different requirements of each grant project that's been awarded from a notice of funding opportunity. Is it being compliant to the criteria that's in the NOFO? And also our work staff, are they skilled appropriately, and so forth. And the last but not least, I'll say that we're using the AI for training the workforce real time. So we're looking at a chatbot that can provide real-time training to our grants management work staff in the entire life cycle. That's going to be necessary as we're looking at the skill gaps that we found from the grants management people. I'm trying not to take up too much time, so let me just stop there.
Let me ask, there was a fascinating question that came in on the chat just a moment ago that kind of relates, which is, Andrea, you've kind of described what some of the actions you're taking to use AI at Interior are. The question was, does every government agency allow bots to complete narratives and reports for a grant recipient? And I don't know whether anybody particular wants to jump in, but I imagine maybe Chelsea or perhaps even Margaret or perhaps Chad would know. And maybe Natalie, you can say whether or not you do. Can you, within 10 or 15 seconds say, do you allow in your agency for bots to be used for grant reporting? Chelsea, what about you for USDA? Is that something you're aware of?
For grant reporting in particular, I mean, I think we're mostly focused on if we have two bots that we actually use to help speed up the work of the grants management specialists. So one is for the Federal Audit Clearinghouse, and the other one is for SAM.gov. Here at USDA, we actually have 22 grant systems, and so we have a lot of system fragmentation. And so we are looking at opportunities to use things like bots, but also about internal firewalled AI solutions that can help speed up some of the more day-to-day processes. I think with the use of AI.
I apologize. I was asking if a grant applicant, for example, let's pretend the Kansas Department of Agriculture provides you with some required grant reporting or narratives. Do you notice if they're using a bot? Do you allow that? Do you preclude that?
I mean, it would depend on our agencies. One of the issues that we've found actually is that when folks are writing to us, sometimes they have AI hallucinations in their footnotes, and that's pretty easy to see. And it gets us into the field of scientific and research integrity. So it's not always possible for a human to spot that AI has been used. And I think our agencies are in different places in terms of saying, you know, how do we see it? Is it allowable? Things like that. But we also want to make sure that from the applicant side of things, that we're not veering into the integrity issues where the research
Yeah.
actually doesn't exist that they're citing.
So I'm hearing from you, we don't have a policy on it. It happens. Sometimes we notice it if they're not doing a good job of using AI. Do any of our other panelists have experience or policy where they would say, yes, that's permissible, no, that's not, maybe even that's encouraged? Anybody else want to jump in?
I'll jump in to say that we don't discourage our recipients from using artificial intelligence to create their progress reports or to create their reporting requirements. But I will tell you that we do look to make sure it's coherent and it's matching what their requirements are in their grant project, their research, what the criteria was that was in their original application. If it doesn't make sense, we're going to shoot it back to them and say, this report that you've submitted to us is not applicable to the requirements that were noted in your grant application in your project. So we're going to ask you for further information and to rewrite or to re-provide your information to us. These types of things, if you're not giving us appropriate reporting, can lead to suspension of your project. It can lead to actual termination of your project. So we're not saying you can't use the artificial intelligence technology or whatever other technology that they need to actually submit the reports to us, but they need to, as Chelsea said, AI can hallucinate. They need to double check the information and the work that they're providing to their federal agency and make sure that it is applicable to the requirements that they listed in their grant application. I saw somebody in the chat also ask, how does the site visit process, the reverse site visit process work? So we receive documents and information in from the grant recipients, and then we have a artificial intelligence that actually looks at the documentation that we receive, and we put in actual criteria. We've coded in certain criteria that we're looking for in those site visit documents. For compliance to CFR 200, the administrative requirements. And yes, the other question was about the artificial intelligence cost analysis. That yes, we're looking to see if the costs are allowable according to 2 CFR 200, if they're reasonable and if they're allocable. So we've got that whole thing covered. We're not perfect, but it's really an awesome ongoing project. And I just want to be responsive to some of the comments in the chat.
Yeah. Okay. So my take is no one here says grant recipients can't use AI, but do so at your own risk. You better get it straight because you're not going to be forgiven. You might even lose some grant funding or the entirety of your grant if the AI screws it up, because ultimately you as the applicant and the program manager at the local level are responsible. I want to make sure that we address a couple of other topics. We've kind of touched on technology quite a bit. One of the things that Andrea raised is kind of the issue of compliance. And Margaret, I'd like to ask you, there are a lot of organizations at the federal level that try and kind of balance, well, how much focus do we spend on compliance versus support to help make sure the program succeeds? Can you talk a little bit about your experience about kind of how to build strong relationships and how to kind of focus on performance appropriately, even while remaining compliant?
Sure. I think that it's really important to establish strong relationships with grantees. And it actually starts with setting clear expectations at the start. Grants, unlike some instances where an entity may work with a contractor, grants involve multiple groups or individuals along the way, and it's easy to see how communications would not flow through. But it's imperative as the grants managers and as the leaders that you really work to establish relationships that include clear and consistent communications channels. Similarly, it's important to emphasize the need for technical assistance, the opportunities for technical assistance, data sharing, and maintaining regular engagement with grantees. All in all, I think that, again, relationships are really key. Again, comparing this to contracts where it may be like a long-term contract, but people turn over, or it's maybe a contract overseer, and then the deliverer. It's just important to have essentially a framework within the grant that includes communications, set expectation setting, and regular communication channels to and fro.
I want to ask Scott, you kind of, with NGMA, represent a wide range of grant managers and perhaps kind of in particular, a lot of grant applicants and recipients. And we've had some discussion around communications, kind of how important it is to build a strong relationship. A lot of course, I think that funding uncertainty question, back to the first topic, is, hey, are we really justifying both the program and the outcomes and the particular kind of ways that we're implementing the grant? I wonder, Scott, if you can share any thoughts about how it is that grant managers can do a better job of communicating their program success, results, or even challenges. How should grant managers do a better job communicating to their stakeholders?
Well, so it's an important question. I think there's actually two aspects, at least from the grant manager standpoint, when it comes to communication. One aspect is when I'm serving my program, whether I'm on the private side or the federal side, how am I setting up the reportable data such that either if I'm in the federal program side, the data that we're collecting justifies the existence of the program, or in some cases demonstrates maybe that there are better ways to use the funding, or if I'm on the private side and I'm looking to be competitive in federal programs, how is it that I'm structuring my program from the application onward, especially where I've got discretion, to set it up such that the data proves those points or demonstrates those points in an increasingly competitive environment. That piece, the how do I look at the evaluation and the data points elements from the beginning of the proposal process or the beginning, if I'm on the federal side, of deciding what it is that we're looking to do with these program funds. That's key, is starting early. So it's a long way of getting to the point of start early and thinking about 3 years from now, what do I want to be able to say about what it is that I accomplished? Because all of with federal grants, especially, this is true of state grants, local grants, and even private grants, is the data that's reported will be the data that everyone agreed should be reported years ago. So you want to set that up right in the first place. The second piece of this, which is not exactly what you asked, but something that I think is important, is as we increasingly move into a world where there will be increased automation and likely a smaller but much more skilled workforce in the context of grants management, the grants managers conveying one, their skill sets, and two, their utility, both internally within their organizations and then externally to industry, is extremely important. Most of the grants management process, we talk about it in sort of high level terms in a presentation like this, but on a day-to-day basis, most of it boils down to workflow in terms of data processing, whether it's how you expended the funds or what things you accomplished, one, and then two, compliance considerations. A lot of that data piece is going to be automated. It's already being automated. A lot of it's financial data management, and the accounting firms are automating this for their industry, which means for the grants management industry as well. So that's going to happen. With compliance, only so much of that can be fully automated. A lot of that will still have a human element for many years to come. So the skilled grants manager being able to oversee that workflow and be involved in that workflow is really critical. But that's a message that the grants managers need to convey.
Right. So a fascinating question came in from the chat from April Nowak. She says, how do federal agencies anticipate the challenge and what challenges do they anticipate with applicants using AI to write competitive applications? And so I'm curious as to whether or not any of you have had direct experience with that, either from the receiving application side. I don't know, perhaps Chelsea, you could say something about that, or maybe from the either submitting or receiving side, Natalie. Would either of you like to comment on kind of using AI to write applications and perhaps to make promises, as Scott suggests, about kind of the future vision for what success looks like 3 years down the road?
Sure. I'll take the question from the federal side. So I talked previously about research integrity and scientific integrity. And sometimes when you look at applications written by AI, they're very general or they don't quite match up with what you're asking. Sometimes when you see the use of large language models, they might be looking also at a body of information about the whole program. We have a program here at USDA called AFRI. It's our flagship scientific R&D program, and it actually has 27 different components. And so if you're asking an AI to help you write an AFRI proposal, it may not be specifically targeted to the one of the 27 different versions of that program that you could be writing for. And so there does have to be that human element to look at the NOFO as it is written for that particular fiscal year to make sure that you're actually providing the correct information. I think also, of course, if you're doing a summary of scientific analysis, that's where you can get into trouble with your citations. But what I will say is here at USDA, we're actually conducting review of every single NOFO for every single competitive grant and cooperative agreement program to make sure that what we're asking for in the NOFO makes sense. We're looking at a level of burden that's actually imposed on all of our applicants. We're looking at the program outcomes and outputs and measures and things like that to make sure that we're not just keeping with the status quo, but we're also considering all of the different demands that are on those applicants, as well as a way for us to better demonstrate our efficacy in spending taxpayer dollars as a department. And so in looking at how the programs are actually designed from the bottom up, we can see places where applicants might elect to use AI as a time saver method, right? But in the end, I think you're right, Jeff, when you said you can use it, but it's at your own risk. I will just say USDA is 21 awarding agencies and offices, and each agency has its own policies. So for example, our National Institute of Food and Agriculture does have a policy on this, but some of our other agencies may not. So I think you have to know the agency you're applying for, really read your NOFO carefully and see if using AI is actually the best tool for you to use.
Natalie, anything you'd like to add from your perspective?
Sure. So we have an annual application for our state-approved pathways that align with labor market data. So we have 285 school districts, and we process approximately 3,500 applications annually. So they have to put in goals for several different areas, the courses they'll teach. So I don't, and it's within an authenticated application. So I have not seen evidence of that. And then the Perkins application, the annual local application, they have got to look at their performance indicators that includes graduation rates, state assessments each year, post-program placement, non-trad. And then they've got to determine their individual gaps in either their standalone district or consortium of small districts put together. Then they've got to look back at the last 3 years to say, are my strategies working? So we have not seen evidence of AI because it is so specific. In addition to that, in their Perkins grant, they've got to make sure that it aligns with the comprehensive local needs assessment in their region. So making sure that it's meeting the needs of their region, both at the secondary and post-secondary level.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a question, a little bit of its kind of next generation talent, a little bit of its workforce planning, and I'm hoping that Scott and Chad might be able to offer a perspective. And specifically, one or two of you have said, well, we're going to have fewer staff in grants management, but they're going to have have even deeper skill and knowledge. And in fact, that's kind of what I've taken away from some of both Chelsea and Natalie's comments on AI, which is, boy, the person who's using the AI better really know their stuff so they can tell when it's hallucinating, they can frame the right probing questions. And in that case, they're actually, nobody has any rules against them using it. It's just kind of at their own risk. So my question is, what do we think the future for kind of what expertise, experience, background is needed in grants management professionals? And how do we keep the people with that? And how do we develop that in the people who are kind of moving into the market? And maybe, Scott, if you could start, and Chad, maybe you can take the perspective from the federal government, how you're going to kind of bring that in.
Certainly. So I think it's safe to say that what we've seen, especially with the advent of the uniform guidance roughly a decade ago at this point, is that the federal approach to grants management, this was always really, I'd say for 50 years, been the case to a degree, but it's increasingly the case, which is the federal approach to public grant management, public funding, is increasingly driving the entire system. So what happens at the state level, what happens at the local level. So to the extent the question is what skill sets does someone need if they're a grants manager, it increasingly all starts, it has, again, always been this way, but increasingly it is that it all starts with 2 CFR Part 200 skill sets. especially the administrative requirements and the cost principles. Grants managers who aren't skilled in those areas will increasingly struggle, even with increased automation. In terms of then sort of where do we go from there? I'm a little biased in this respect. I'm going to speak from NGMA's perspective, but with how large the grants industry is, right? In 2024, it was $1.2 trillion in funding. Now, again, half that's Medicaid. So if you take out the Medicaid, it's still about $600 billion in funding. Very diverse programs. We just heard right from USDA, 21 different sub-agencies and 22 systems. So how do we then, when we as an employer want to evaluate whether we're hiring someone with the right skill sets, credibly evaluate that, especially in a technical area? NGMA's approach to this is, look, we really do need accredited credentials in grants management, as this sector is increasingly requiring higher skilled, more experienced positions. And so that's why we've created the Certified Grant Management Specialist certification that's now accredited. And I think we'll start to see that happen elsewhere as well. I think we'll also, if we don't see other accredited credentials, I think we'll start to see more reliance on things like the CGMS across state, federal, local government.
Okay, I'm going to ask Chad to respond. I'm also going to foreshadow. We're going to wrap up probably about 2 minutes late, maybe 3 minutes late, because after Chad responds to this question, I'm going to have a question for Margaret, kind of what is your vision for the future of grants management policy and so forth from the federal perspective? And the question kind of asking Natalie to say, what do state, local grant recipients and applicants want from the federal government? So those will be the two final questions. But Chad, what are your thoughts about kind of how do you retain the right sorts of capabilities for grant managers at the federal level?
Yeah, at the federal level, I would echo a lot of what Scott said, particularly about understanding of the common frameworks for grants management. It's so important, right, to have the core knowledge base from a compliance perspective, from an understanding perspective. I'm somewhat personally agnostic about the need for certifications or not for those skill sets. I do think, though, beyond just core compliance, thinking about what we need for grants managers at the top levels and program levels, real analysis skills. People can ask smart questions. I think about my liberal arts background and training and how useful that is. Like I can learn quickly. I can analyze quickly. I can work with my team and teammates across HHS, discuss and brainstorm ideas to novel challenges, because it's the real wins come from improvements to how we deliver mission. That aren't the obvious answers, right? There are obvious answers. We can continue to move along and improve. But we need people, particularly when we use AI increasingly, with human in the loop tools, we need to understand and set goals. Like humans need to set goals. Like I need smart humans to help me like improve and set goals for how we drive this mission across our 5,000+ person HHS workforce. What do we do to help train and retain those people? We deliver training across our whole department. We're starting to implement training requirements for grants managers. We're scaling the training we offer from live instruction to self-paced training based on demand from the last year, an increased demand from those staffing challenges, and really finding ways to keep them engaged, not just in understanding the rules for compliance, but understanding how their knowledge of that can help drive and improve mission.
Great. Okay, so for our concluding questions, I would like to start with Margaret and ask Margaret, kind of what is your vision for, or what insight can you offer into the policy priorities that both exist very recently or are coming soon? What's next in your mind?
Thank you for that question. I think that the work of this administration really seeks to tighten the execution of grants through the federal government, and not just because it's a compliance exercise, but rather to strengthen the effectiveness, the accountability, and the alignment of federal grants with national priorities. Translating that to our office here at the Office of Federal Financial Management, we are refining and updating to CFR 200 to serve as the guidebook and hopefully the means of ensuring common application of this grants policy. It should be coming forth soon. But what we're also hoping is that with the issuance of 2 CFR, will provide agencies an opportunity to be consistent in their application of grants policy. We've got the grants EO that outlines the administration's view on things. CFR provides regulations at the detailed level of what that looks like. And now we will look to agencies and work with them, of course, for consistent application. And in that way, it's our hope that recipients will feel like they're working with one federal government that has at least one set of outcomes in mind for grants and grants policy.
Great, thank you. And Natalie, speaking on behalf of every last state and local grant applicant across the country, what do you want from the federal government?
Well, what was most helpful to me since I've been in the role that I am is coming to DC, secondary and post-secondary, and attending a data quality institute. I think that was really helpful to hear from our federal leaders and walked away with a good understanding. I think what we need, I'm in Kansas. We have 285 school districts. The majority are rural. And I would like to think that no matter what your zip code is, of course, every student has the same opportunity and needs to be aware of all the opportunities and occupations. And I'm speaking about Perkins specifically because that's the area that I work in. So smaller schools must partner together if they don't have a large enough allocation to form a consortium. And the consortium, their purchases, what they do, their goals must be mutually beneficial to all members. So sometimes when we look at their data points and they reflect on them, they're as the consortium as a whole. So we get lots of questions when we talk about the expertise. So thinking about those consortiums and those smaller districts who may not have the expertise as some of the larger districts because they wear so many hats. So thinking about how we might work together to think about supporting those smaller districts so they have the opportunities, because we want everyone to have access to those opportunities to make sure that students are able to be aware of the occupations, the equipment, and the industries that are needed in our state.
Okay, thank you. I want to mention I saw one or two other themes come through in the chat. One of those was probably specific to USDA in this instance, but maybe more broad, which is 22 different agencies. Must they have 22 different ways of doing business? Since perhaps I do business, as a State Department of Agriculture with more than one of those components of USDA. And so that might be kind of, again, the question of whether or not there's an opportunity to streamline and make more consistent business processes for the user, in this case, an individual State Department, and have that cut not just perhaps across components of USDA, but perhaps, heaven forbid, even across a broader set of components across government, so that it kind of does seem more like one federal government. The other thing I heard actually from both sides is, hey, you need to kind of think about who the stakeholder is. So if you're using AI to write a grant application, you better still have pretty clearly in mind what federal grant money you're asking for. What is the purpose of that program? What are the concerns and the needs of the people who are managing that program? And similarly, if you're a federal grant manager, you better think about the rural folks, not just the folks in cities, not just the folks who have a squeaky wheel and want the grease and kind of demand a lot of attention, but think about the needs, the characteristics of the programs that the grants are trying to serve. And with that, I'll say just kind of one or two logistical things, and then we'll close out. We will make both the slides that were presented with the details of the grant survey, as well as a recording and a video of this session. So for those who thought, hey, I love some of the things Scott said about what sorts of skills are needed, you don't have to have made notes of all of those. We will provide those to you. We will not necessarily say, well, you may, members of the audience may want to ask some of these folks your individual questions. Certainly we can't prevent that. If you ask, we can pass along the question to those folks, but we won't release their emails. They can decide whether or not they would like to respond to them. And with that, I want to thank you very much as panelists for kind of helping bring to life some of the findings from the annual grant survey this year and helping kind of folks understand how you've succeeded and how you've addressed some of the challenges you faced. So thank you very much for joining us, and we'll look forward to doing this again next year. Thank you, and we'll close the event here now. Take care.